The orbital station hummed with its familiar mechanical rhythm as Jake wiped grease from his hands, another shift in the engine bays complete. 5 years since humanity's brutal first contact war with the Vayari had ended, and here he was, sharing cramped quarters with Thal, the 7-foot warrior who'd pulled him from burning wreckage during the Battle of Europa's Grave. They weren't just roommates. They were brothers forged in fire and blood. Jake rounded the corner to their quarters and froze. She stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the corridor lights. Navy blue skin seemed to absorb and reflect the station's glow simultaneously, creating an otherworldly shimmer. Blonde hair, rare among Vayari, cascaded past her shoulders in waves that caught the light like spun gold against midnight. Violet eyes locked onto his, pulsing with that inner luminescence unique to her species, and Jake felt his breath catch. "You must be Jake," she said, her voice like warm honey with a slight harmonic undertone. "I'm Solara. Thal's mentioned you, extensively." Her tail, sleek and expressive, swayed behind her, the tip curling slightly upward. Jake had learned enough Vayari body language to know that gesture meant curiosity. Maybe more. "All good things, I hope," Jake managed, acutely aware of how his worn jumpsuit and engine grease probably looked to a diplomatic trainee. Solara's lips curved into a smile that made something tighten in his chest. "He said you were brave. Stubborn. That you see people, not species." She stepped closer, and Jake caught a scent like ozone and exotic flowers. "He didn't mention you were so intense." "Solara." Thal's booming voice preceded him as he emerged from the refresher, scales gleaming wet. "Stop making my friend uncomfortable." But there was affection in his tone, the kind reserved for beloved siblings. "I'm merely introducing myself," Solara protested innocently, though her tail betrayed her amusement with a playful flick. That night, Jake lay in his bunk trying to ignore the way Solara's laugh echoed through the thin walls as she caught up with her brother. Trying to ignore how his heart had hammered when their hands accidentally brushed as she'd passed him the evening meal. Trying to ignore the way her eyes had lingered on him, really looked at him, in a way that felt both foreign and intoxicating. He'd kept his distance from Vayari females out of respect, out of loyalty to Thal. But Solara wasn't just any Vayari. The air seemed to crackle with possibility whenever she was near, and Jake found himself hyper-aware of her presence even through walls. In the adjacent room, Solara pressed her hand against the bulkhead, psychic senses reaching out carefully. Human emotions burned so bright, so chaotic compared to her people's calm mental harmonies. And Jake's, they blazed like a star, pulling at something deep inside her that she'd tried to deny since she was young. This diplomatic training, she realized, was going to be far more complicated than she'd anticipated. The observation deck was empty at 0300 hours, exactly how Jake preferred it. Earth hung in the viewport like a blue marble suspended in velvet, distant but never forgotten. He pressed his palm against the cold glass, watching clouds swirl over continents he'd once called home. "Can't sleep either?" Jake turned to find Solara stepping from the shadows, wrapped in a thin robe that clung to her curves. Her navy blue skin seemed to glow faintly in Earth's reflected light, and her blonde hair was loose, tumbling freely around her shoulders. "Shift work messes with your cycle," Jake said, throat suddenly dry. "You?" "Diplomatic briefings." She moved beside him, close enough that he could feel warmth radiating from her skin. Vayari ran hot. "And other things keeping me awake." Her reflection in the viewport showed those violet eyes studying him with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. Her tail swayed slowly, hypnotically, behind her. "Jake," she said softly, turning to face him fully. "Can I tell you something? Something I probably shouldn't?" He nodded, not trusting his voice. "Your emotions, they're so bright against my psychic senses. Humans feel everything so deeply, so chaotically. It's overwhelming sometimes, being around your species." She stepped closer, and Jake's back hit the viewport. "But you burn brightest of all." Since I was young, listening to Thal's stories, I've dreamed about what it would feel like to touch that fire. Solara, Jake started, loyalty warring with desire. I know. You're loyal to my brother. It's one of the things that makes you burn so beautifully. Her hand rose slowly, hovering near his cheek. But I can feel what you feel, Jake. The way your heart races when I enter a room. The way your mind goes quiet when our eyes meet. You're drawn to me just as I'm drawn to you. This is a bad idea, Jake whispered, but he didn't move away. The worst, Solara agreed, and her tail wrapped gently around his leg, the touch sending electricity through his nervous system. But I've spent years trying to ignore this pull. Years pretending that humans were just another species. Then I met you, and everything my brother told me became real. Her fingertips finally made contact with his jaw, and Jake gasped. The touch was warm, electric, and something more, a whisper of her emotions bleeding into his own awareness through that psychic connection. He felt her desire, her longing, her fear of rejection, all swirling together in a dizzying rush. Tell me to stop, Solara breathed, her face inches from his. Tell me to walk away, and I will. Jake's hand came up to cover hers, pressing it more firmly against his cheek. I can't. Her smile was equal parts triumph and relief. Good. Because I'm tired of pretending I don't want you. The walk to Solara's quarters felt both eternal and instantaneous. Her hand was warm in his, fingers interlaced with a confidence that suggested she'd already made her decision. Jake's mind raced with 1,000 reasons this was wrong, Thal's trust, diplomatic complications, species differences, but his heart hammered out a single, undeniable truth: he wanted this. Wanted her. Thal had finally collapsed into one of his people's deep, drunken hibernations after consuming an entire bottle of Centauri brandy, reminiscing about the war. He wouldn't wake for hours. Maybe that made Jake a terrible friend. Or maybe it just made him human. Solara's quarters were smaller than the ones she shared with Thal, but private. The door sealed behind them with a soft hiss, and suddenly they were alone in the dim glow of bioluminescent strips. I need you to understand something, Solara said, turning to face him. Her tail swayed nervously now, betraying the confidence in her voice. When Vayari bond intimately, it's not just physical. Our psychic connection intensifies. You'll feel what I feel. I'll feel what you feel. It can be overwhelming. I don't care, Jake said, reaching for her. She came into his arms like she belonged there, her body warm and solid against his. When their lips met, Jake felt the world tilt. The kiss was soft at first, exploratory, but quickly deepened as years of denied attraction came flooding through. Her scales were smooth under his hands, warming further beneath his touch as he traced the curve of her spine. Solara gasped against his mouth, and suddenly Jake felt it, an echo of her pleasure rippling through his own awareness. It was like nothing he'd ever experienced, a feedback loop of sensation that made his knees weak. Jake, she whispered, pulling him toward the sleeping platform. I've wanted this for so long. How long? He asked, helping her with the clasps of her diplomatic robes. Since Thal first showed me your picture. Since he told me about the human who refused to leave wounded behind, even when it meant capture. Her robe slid away, revealing navy blue skin that seemed to shimmer with inner starlight. Since I realized that human courage and compassion weren't just stories. Jake's clothes followed, and when their bare skin met, the psychic connection intensified. He could feel her desire mixing with his own, could sense her nervousness and excitement and fierce determination. Her tail wrapped around his waist, pulling him closer as they tumbled onto the platform together. You're mine, Solara whispered against his ear, her voice rough with emotion and desire. I don't care what anyone says. You're mine, Jake. And as her lips found his again, as their bodies pressed together and that psychic bond deepened into something profound and unbreakable, Jake discovered that he'd never wanted anything more than to be hers. Time lost all meaning in Solara's quarters. Every touch became amplified through their psychic connection, her pleasure echoing into him, his wonder reflecting back into her, creating spiraling waves of sensation that left them both gasping. Jake had never imagined intimacy could be like this, so complete that the boundary between self and other began to blur. Solara's scales grew warmer beneath his hands as he explored the planes of her body, learning what made her breath catch, what made her tail tighten around him. She was patient with his human unfamiliarity, guiding his touch to sensitive areas, the hollow of her throat where scales met softer skin, the ridge along her spine that made her arch and moan, the base of her tail where nerve clusters sent pleasure racing through her entire body. "I can feel you," Jake breathed against her neck, marveling at the connection. "Everything you're feeling, it's like we're one," Solara finished, her violet eyes blazing with inner light. "This is what bonding means for my people. But it's never been this intense before. Your emotions, Jake, they're like fire racing through my veins." She pulled him closer, their bodies moving together in a rhythm that felt both primal and transcendent. The psychic feedback intensified with every moment, building towards something neither of them fully understood. Jake felt pleasure compound upon itself, felt Solara's joy at his wonder, felt the fierce possessiveness and tender affection swirling through her mind. "I love you," she gasped suddenly, the words torn from her as the connection peaked. "I've loved you before I even met you." Jake's response was lost in sensation as something fundamental shifted between them. The psychic bond that had been building suddenly snapped into place with an almost audible click, and Jake cried out as violet light exploded behind his eyes. He felt Solara's consciousness flood into his awareness, felt her love and desire and absolute certainty that they belonged together. When the world finally stopped spinning, Jake realized something had changed. His skin tingled strangely, and when he looked down, he saw faint violet markings tracing patterns across his arms and chest, flowing designs that seemed to pulse with the same inner light as Solara's eyes. "The mating bond," Solara whispered, tracing the marks with reverent fingers. "It's permanent, Jake. We're bound now, for life." Jake should have felt panic. Instead, he felt peace. Looking at Solara's tear-streaked face, her blonde hair wild around her shoulders, her navy blue skin glowing with satisfaction and love, he felt only rightness. "I love you too," he said, pulling her close. "I think I have since the moment you stood in that doorway." They lay tangled together as the station's night cycle continued, Solara's tail wrapped possessively around his leg, her head resting on his chest. Neither spoke of Thal or consequences or what morning would bring. For now, this moment was enough. Morning came too quickly. Jake woke to find Solara already awake, violet eyes studying the marks now permanently etched across his skin. Her expression was unreadable, but through their new bond, he felt her worry clearly. "Thal's going to kill us," Jake said quietly. "Probably me more than you," Solara replied with a weak smile. "I violated sibling honor. I seduced my brother's human friend. I—" The door chimed insistently, followed by Thal's voice. "Solara." "Jake." "Emergency protocols, stations under attack." They scrambled into clothes, and Jake followed Solara into the corridor where Thal waited, still hungover but alert. His eyes immediately locked onto the violet markings visible above Jake's collar, and his scales flushed dark with fury. "You bonded with my sister?" Thal roared. "You." "Later." Jake cut him off. "What's the attack?" Thal's warrior instincts overrode his rage. "Anti-human saboteurs. They've seized engineering and are threatening to vent the entire section." His eyes narrowed at Jake. "And they want all humans evacuated, or dead." Jake's mind raced, and suddenly something shifted in his perception. Through the bond, he felt Solara's empathic sight bleeding into his awareness, could sense the locations of people throughout the station, their emotions like colored flames in his mind. A gift from their mating bond. "I can find them," Jake said, surprising himself. "I can feel where they are." What followed was a desperate race through the station's corridors. Jake's newfound empathic awareness, combined with his intimate knowledge of the station's systems and human ingenuity, allowed them to outmaneuver the saboteurs at every turn. Solara fought beside him, her psychic abilities now partially shared through their bond, while Thal provided warrior strength and tactical expertise. When the last saboteur fell and station security arrived, Thal cornered Jake and Solara in the aftermath. But his rage had cooled to something more contemplative. "You saved the station," Thal said slowly. "The bond made you stronger together." "I'm sorry," Jake started, but Thal raised a hand. "No Veari could ever tame a human heart anyway," Thal said, his version of a smile crossing his scaled features. "And my sister has always been too stubborn for her own good. If anyone could handle you, Jake, I suppose it would be her." It wasn't quite forgiveness, but it was acceptance. Close enough. Later, in the privacy of Solara's quarters, she pulled Jake close, that possessive tail wrapping around him as the door sealed once more. "You're mine," she whispered against his lips, violet eyes blazing with love and desire and absolute certainty. "Forever." Jake kissed her deeply, feeling their bond pulse with shared emotion. "Forever," he agreed. And as they fell into each other's arms once more, Earth spinning silently outside the viewports, Jake realized that sometimes the best things in life came from crossing lines you never meant to cross.